Okay, this PowerPoint over ecology is actually chapter 3 in the book, and it's going to have 3 separate videos. What is ecology? Ecology is a scientific study of interactions between organisms and their environment, focusing on energy transfer. Ecology is the science of relationships. And in studying ecology, scientists have to use observations. There's direct observations, what they can actually see, and then there's indirect observations, with stuff that they know is happening, but they can't quite see it. Then they may have to do some labs or experiments, and that may be actually done in the lab or out in the field. And if they're doing an experiment in the lab, that would be maybe testing how bacteria could affect the water quality. Or if they go out to the field, they have to actually go out to where the organism actually lives, monitor it out there, and come up with some accurate data. You get a lot more accurate data if you're out in the field than simulating something in the lab. And ecologists will use models. There's the food web, food chain, which are models that can be computer generated. And then there's the mathematical models where they use a lot of statistics. In ecology, our planet is kind of broken down into different categories. There's the biosphere. Some people between biosphere and ecosystem will put a biome. It's an area with a specific climate, which in turn will bring about specific animals living in that area. An example of a biome is the rainforest or deciduous forest. Then we have ecosystems, community, population, and organisms. An organism is any unicellular or multicellular form exhibiting all of the characteristics of life. It's the lowest level of organization. An example may be one blue jay out at Wilson Lake. Population. A group of organisms of one species living in the same place and can interbreed. They will have fertile offspring, and they will compete with each other for resources, food, shelter, to mate. An example of a population would be all of the blue jays out at Wilson Lake. Not just one of them, but all of them. Then we have community. Several interacting populations that inhabit a common environment and are interdependent. And there may be many environments within a community. So for example, at Wilson Lake, there's the lake environment, there's the woods environment. And there could also be many habitats within a community. And a habitat is just a physical location. So the habitat of a robin may be the tree. The habitat of the trout is going to be the lake. So an example of a community would be the blue jays, the raccoons, the squirrels, the deer, the robins, the rabbits, all out at Wilson Lake. Ecosystem, populations in a community, and the abiotic factors with which they interact. Abiotic factors are non-living things found in an environment. So all the blue jays, rabbits, squirrels, deer, etc. at Wilson Lake, plus the non-living things at Wilson Lake, like the water, the gravel, and the dirt. And Wilson Lake is considered a deciduous forest. That would be its biome. And then the biosphere, the area of the earth that supports life. It has the highest level of organization. It has the most living creatures there. And the Earth's biosphere is very special because we have life. So why is there life on Earth and nowhere else that we know of? It's because we are that perfect distance from the sun. We don't burn up. We're not too cold. We have water. We have a solid crust. And we have this atmosphere that is perfect for life. And it says there, water and properties of water. Well, one thing that's nice about water is when it freezes, it floats. So think about lakes every summer or every winter. Water freezes, it sits on the top. If water, when it froze, if it would sink to the bottom, lakes would freeze over every summer and then there would not be living creatures in that lake. But the fact that water does float once it freezes, you are able to retain life in the lakes throughout the winter. What's meant by an environment? Refers to all the conditions surrounding the organism. The environment is made up of abiotic factors and biotic factors. Biotic factors are all the living things. around the organism, and the abiotic factors are all the non-living parts of the environment: temperature, soil, light, moisture, and air currents. The biotic factors could also be thought of as the biomass, which is all of the organic matter in one area. Okay. Autotrophs, also called producers. Autotrophs produce oxygen and glucose. Autotrophs will use glucose and oxygen to go through cellular respiration to make ATP. ATP is energy. So there's that chemical formula, the glucose plus the oxygen. A waste product is carbon dioxide. There's water, which is used by the organism, and then the ATP is that energy that gets used to keep all cells alive. Autotrophs can also capture the sun's energy from sunlight or chemicals and convert it into starch, which will eventually get broken down into glucose. Autotrophs will go through photosynthesis, using the sun's energy and turning it into carbs or starch. And that happens in the chloroplast, and you can see it's the sun's energy plus carbon dioxide plus water will make that glucose and oxygen. And then in turn, those autotrophs use that glucose and oxygen to make energy. It's all about making energy. And those photosynthesizers make that glucose and oxygen for themselves. Chemosynthesis, our chemicals are used to produce the carbs and the starch. And a lot of times the chemical is sulfur. And you can see H2S, that's sulfuric acid. So sulfur is used to help make the glucose for the organism, then using the glucose to make energy. Okay. Feeding relationships, the producers, again, all autotrophs. They could be plants, they could be bacteria, some protists. They're considered to be at the bottom of the food chain or bottom of the food web. They have 100% energy. They produce all of the food and oxygen for other organisms. They're producing glucose and oxygen. They're really doing it for themselves, but then we use it to make energy. So they're called producers because they're producing glucose and oxygen. Heterotrophs. They're also called consumers. Heterotrophs are organisms that need to acquire food to make their energy. So heterotrophs use glucose and oxygen to go through cellular respiration to make that ATP, just like plants. But we're known as consumers because we ingest food that originally contained the sun's energy. There's the herbivores, the carnivores, the omnivores, which you guys should know. The decomposers are breaking down dead material, like bacteria and fungi living off of dead plants, living off of dead animals. Then the detrivores feed on detritus material. An example of a detrivore are mites, shrimps, crabs, earthworms. Earthworms live off stuff out of the soil. Mites live off of other animals. Shrimps will live off of detrivores, or kind of this icky stuff in the ocean, and so will crabs. Herbivores, so herbivores eat the plants. The plants have 100% energy, but the plants use that energy for them to stay alive. And they will use all the energy, but maybe like 10%. So when an herbivore eats a plant, they're only going to have 10% of energy available to them. Then let's say an omnivore eats an herbivore. The herbivore had 10%. The omnivore is only going to have 1% available to it. Because as these organisms use the stuff they're eating, their body's using it to keeping them alive, and some of it's also lost as heat. And 90% is used or lost as heat, and only 10% gets to go on to the next level to be used by the next living creature. Okay. So the consumers. There's primary consumers, there's secondary consumers, and there's tertiary consumers. And there could be another level known as quaternary. The primary consumers only eat plants. They are herbivores, can only get 10% of the energy from the level below them being the plants. Secondary consumers eat primary consumers, or possibly could go down directly eating a producer. If they're eating the primary consumers, they'll only get 1% of energy because you can only get 10% from the level below you. Tertiary consumers eat the secondary consumers, possibly primary and possibly producers, depending on what the animal is. And they're only going to have 0.1% of energy available to them because you only get 10% from the level below you. And then the quaternary could eat tertiary, secondary, primary, or producers, and they're only going to have 0.01% energy available to them. So let's say a secondary consumer like a raccoon went ahead and ate some berries. Berries are a plant. Plants have 100% energy. You get 10% of what you just ate. So at that point, the secondary consumer would have 10% energy because it's not eating the level directly below it.